Okay, so here's something they don't teach you in Balkan history class. The Albanians were right. They've been right for about 3,000 years. And every single empire that tried to rewrite that story, the Byzantines, the Serbs, the Ottomans, the communists, they were all wrong. DNA just proved it. And I don't mean proved it in some vague, cherry-picked 23andMe commercial way. I mean peer-reviewed, ancient bones out of the ground, hard science proved it. You know how Balkan politics gets complicated? Yeah, well, DNA just made it so much more complicated. Let's be real for a second. We all have that one friend group chat that gets completely derailed when history comes up. Someone mentions Kosovo. Someone else mentions Greater Albania. Another person starts yelling about 1389. It's a mess. But at the center of that mess, for centuries, has been this one specific argument. Who was actually here first? The Serbs say they were, the Greeks say they were, the Albanians say, bro, we never left. And for the longest time, it was all just nationalism and folklore and who could yell the loudest in a restaurant. Until now. Because genetics doesn't care about your nationalist poetry. It doesn't care about your epic folk songs. It cares about bone fragments, isotopes, and haplogroups. And the data that has come out over the last 5 years is not subtle. It is screaming. So grab a coffee or maybe a rakija if that's your thing, because we are about to dig into the actual genetic history of the Balkans. And I promise you, by the end of this, you're going to look at modern Europe completely differently. Let's back up. Way back. Like 3,000 years back. Before the Romans, before the Byzantines, before the Slavs. The Western Balkans were dominated by a group of tribes that the Greeks collectively called the Illyrians. We've got the Dardani, the Ardai, the Taulantii, the Ancellii. These weren't just random savages living in huts. These were Bronze Age Chads with serious metallurgy skills and trade networks that connected the Adriatic to the Danube. They had a language, Illyrian, which is now extinct. We don't have much of it, just fragments, names, inscriptions on a few stones. It's a ghost language. But here's the wild part. The Albanian language today is the only surviving member of what linguists call the Paleo-Balkan language family. It's an isolate within Indo-European. That means Albanian isn't really related to Slavic. It isn't related to Greek. It isn't related to Romance languages like Italian. It sits on its own branch, holding on to vocabulary that doesn't exist anywhere else in Europe. Ever wondered why Albanian sounds nothing like Serbian? Yeah, this is why. Because it didn't come from the same planet, linguistically speaking. Now, for a long time, the Albanian claim was simple. We are the Illyrians. We survived the Roman invasion. We survived the Slavic-migration. We hid in the mountains, and we are still here. That's the national myth. And honestly, it's a good one. It speaks to resilience. It speaks to staying power. The Serbian counterclaim was equally simple. No, you're not. You showed up in the Middle Ages. You migrated down from the Caucasus or somewhere. This is Slavic land. The Greek claim was Southern Albania? That's Northern Epirus. That's Greek. The Turkish claim was more subtle, but it implied that 500 years of Ottoman rule had fundamentally reshaped who the Albanians were, making them a mixed bag of Anatolians and everyone else. So, for centuries, it was your word against mine. And because wars and borders were drawn by whoever had the bigger army, the argument was never really settled. It was just suppressed. But in 2021, a study by Freilich and colleagues in Scientific Reports came out. And it didn't just look at one or two skeletons. It did a comprehensive analysis of ancient DNA from the Western Balkans, specifically looking at Neolithic and Bronze Age Croatia, and what they found was stunning. Genetic continuity. From the Bronze Age to today. The populations living in that region during the Bronze Age, the people we would associate with the Illyrians, they cluster genetically with modern Albanians. But here's the twist that makes this even crazier. They also cluster with modern Croats and Serbs. Wait, what? Yeah, that's the part nobody wants to admit. The Bronze Age DNA of the Western Balkans is the baseline for basically everyone living there now. It's the foundation. So if you're a Serb watching this, you're thinking, see, we are Illyrians too. And if you're an Albanian, you're thinking, no way, they are invaders. But here is the nuance that gets lost when you're arguing online. The genetics don't lie about the direction of flow. The Illyrians weren't wiped out. They are the substrate. They are the base layer of the cake. But then, history happened. Let's fast forward through the fun parts. The Illyrians had a kingdom. Queen Teuta in the 4th century BCE was causing so many problems for Roman shipping in the Adriatic that Rome decided to just conquer the whole place. 168 BCE. Illyria becomes a Roman province. And you know what? The Illyrians became some of the best soldiers in the Roman army. Let that sink in. The backbone of the legions that conquered the known world? A lot of them were Illyrians. And it gets better. Emperor Diocletian, the guy who ended the crisis of the 3rd century, the guy who built a palace in Split, Croatia, he was Illyrian, born in Dalmatia. So was Constantine's father, Constantius Chlorus. And Justinian, the emperor who built the Hagia Sophia and tried to reconquer the West, born in Illyria. So, if someone tells you the Balkans are uncivilized, just remind them that the Romans were being ruled by Balkan dudes 1600 years ago. The Roman Empire was basically a Balkan-managed company by the end. Now, this is where the DNA gets spicy. A 2019 study by Antonio and colleagues in Science looked at ancient Rome. They analyzed 127 ancient individuals, and they found that Rome was a genetic crossroads. It was the New York City of the ancient world. You had people from everywhere, and included in that data were Balkan and Illyrian samples. These samples show exactly what you'd expect. A local Neolithic farmer base mixed with Bronze Age steppe ancestry, the Indo-European expansion that changed Europe around 3500 BCE, and a little bit of Anatolian input. This was confirmed masterfully by the 2022 Lazaridis study in Science, The Genetic History of the Southern Arc. This was a massive, groundbreaking paper. It looked at Anatolia, the Caucasus, Mesopotamia, and the Balkans. And the Illyrian genetic profile? It's exactly as I just said. Local Neolithic plus steppe plus minor Anatolian. So, the Illyrians weren't aliens. They were the product of a specific set of migrations that ended thousands of years before Christ. But then came the event that changed everything for the Balkans. The Slavic migrations. 6th and 7th centuries. Waves of people moving south. This is where the story gets tense, because this is where the narrative of Albanians are migrants comes from, or rather, the inverse. The Slavic migration did affect the northern regions. It changed the genetic landscape massively. Slavic DNA, characterized by the Y haplogroup R1a and I2a L621, flooded into the area. It changed the language. It changed the culture. It made the Balkans Slavic, except for one pocket, the mountains. See, the Albanian language and identity survived precisely because the Albanians were doing what smart people do when an empire collapses and new guys on horses show up. They went to the highlands. They went where the horses couldn't chase them, and they stayed there for centuries. And now, the DNA proves it. Let's look at the modern Albanian genetic profile. This is the receipt. This is the blood test from the lab. If you look at Albanian men, we see something remarkable. Roughly 30% of Albanian men carry a haplogroup called EV13. Now, EV13 was previously called E1B1B1A2, which sounds like a Star Wars droid, but stick with me. EV13 is found in the highest concentration in Europe among Albanians. It is a Bronze Age lineage. It is the ghost of the indigenous Balkan population. This isn't steppe DNA. This isn't Slavic DNA. This is the genetic marker of the people who were working the fields and casting the bronze weapons before the chariot warriors ever showed up. Then you have about 15 to 20% of Albanian men carrying R1b-BY611. This is a Balkan-specific subclade. Again, it's local. It's not the Western European R1b you find in Ireland or Spain. It is a specific mutation that happened right here in the Balkans during the Bronze Age. Add to that J2b L283 at around 15%. This is a Southern European lineage, also Bronze Age. It's the marker of the old Mediterranean world. So, let's do the math here. If we combine EV13, R1b-BY611, and J2b-L283, we are looking at about 60 to 65% of the Albanian male population carrying lineages that we see in ancient DNA from the Bronze Age Western Balkans, lineages that predate the Slavic arrival by thousands of years. That is not a recent migrant population. That is the foundation of the genetic structure. That is the base layer of the cake, still intact. Now, what about the Slavic input? Oh, it's there. We can see it. R1a in Albanians is about 5 to 10%. I2AL 621 is about 10%. The Slavs definitely left a mark. They were neighbors. There was intermarriage. It happens. But compare those numbers to Serbia or Bulgaria, where Slavic Y-DNA dominance can be overwhelming. In Albania, the Slavic contribution is a garnish, not the main course. And this is where I want to talk about the Ottomans, because this is one of the most provocative findings of the last 10 years. For 500 years, the Ottoman Empire ruled Albania. Battle of Savra in 1385. It begins. Skanderbeg, Gjergj Kastrioti, hold out until 1468. National hero. But eventually the empire wins, and the Ottomans rule for centuries. During that time, roughly 70% of the population converts to Islam. So you would think, logically, that 500 years of an empire based in Anatolia would leave a massive genetic footprint. You would expect huge amounts of Central Asian or Anatolian Turkish DNA in the modern Albanian genome. You would be wrong. The Anatolian Turkish contribution to modern Albanian DNA is surprisingly minimal. It's so small that geneticists often flag it as background noise. 500 years of occupation, 500 years of intermingling, and yet the Albanian genome just said, "No, thank you. I will keep my Bronze Age genes, please." Take a moment to digest that. The empire that ruled them longer than the United States has existed, barely left a trace in their blood. It completely transformed their religion. It changed their architecture. It changed their food. But their genetics? Barely a fingerprint. Compare that to the Slavic migrations, which happened in a shorter, sharper burst but changed the genetic profile of the region enormously, especially in the north. So, 500 years of Ottoman rule left less genetic mark than 50 years of Slavic migration. That's a wild statistic. It speaks to how migration patterns actually work. When a massive, aggressive migration happens, it sweeps through. When a bureaucratic empire rules from far away, it collects taxes and leaves the local gene pool alone. Now, I need to address the elephant in the room, or rather, the claims from the neighbors. The Serbian claim that Albanians are recent migrants? Debunked. The DNA shows continuity that is unmatched in the region, except perhaps for the isolated mountain communities of Montenegro. The Albanians are the descendants of the people who were there before the Slavs. That's not an opinion, that's just what the labs show. But here is the uncomfortable part for the Albanian ultra-nationalists. The DNA also shows that Albanians are not pure Illyrians. Nobody is pure. The Illyrians themselves were a mixture, and the modern Albanians have a small but significant chunk of Slavic DNA. And if you go down to southern Albania, there is Greek genetic contribution. It exists. It doesn't dominate, but it's there. It proves that these borders were never hard lines. They were porous. People moved. People loved. People fought. The Greek claim that southern Albania is exclusively Greek. The DNA shows a shared ancestry, yes, but the dominant signature is still the old indigenous Balkan lineage, shared with the north. It's a gradient, not a binary switch. And here is the real kicker for everyone in the region. The 2021 Freilich study and the 2022 Lazaridis study show that all Balkan populations share significant genetic overlap. We are all cousins. It's just a matter of how much of which ingredient you have. Serb, Croatian, Albanian, Greek. You all share the same Stone Age mothers. You share the same Bronze Age fathers. The differences we kill each other over? They are relatively recent layers on top of a very old, very shared foundation. The Balkans are more genetically continuous than you were taught. The history books, especially the nationalist history books written in the 19th and 20th centuries, built identities based on language and religion. But language and religion are fluid. Ask a room full of Bosnians, Croats, and Serbs who speak the same language but follow different religions. The genetics don't align perfectly with those modern identity boxes. This is why this topic is so explosive. Because the DNA doesn't just tell the Albanian story. It tells the story of how we got the Balkans wrong. Think about the historical arc here. The Illyrian kingdom exists. Rome conquers it. The Illyrians become the muscle of Rome. Rome falls. The Slavs move in. The Albanians hide in the mountains. Byzantium tries to Hellenize or Christianize them in its own image. The Ottomans come. Skanderbeg fights. The Ottomans stay. Enver Hoxha comes and closes the country for decades. Extreme isolation. And through all of that, the genetic signal survives. The language survives. That is the miracle. Language is the key here. Genetics can survive because biology just does its thing. But a language surviving 2,000 years of foreign occupation? That's cultural resistance on a level that is hard to comprehend. The Albanian language preserves Indo-European vocabulary that doesn't exist anywhere else. It is a museum of how people spoke before the classical civilizations fully crystallized. And the DNA backs up the idea that this language wasn't imported. It wasn't brought by migrants in the 11th century. It was the descendant of the language those Bronze Age bones were speaking. When the first historical mention of the Albanoi appears in Byzantine sources in the 11th century, that isn't the arrival of a new people. That is the belated acknowledgement of a people who had been there the whole time, riding under the radar because the Byzantines were too busy dealing with the Seljuks and the Bulgarians to care about some mountain tribes. Let's talk about the modern icons for a second, because it makes the story real. Diocletian, I mentioned him. The guy who saved the Roman Empire. He retired to grow cabbages. Literally, he retired to his palace and said he preferred cabbages to power. That guy was an Illyrian. A Balkan guy saved Rome, then decided farming was more fun. Mother Teresa. Born Anjas Gongshe Boyakshu in Skopje in 1910, ethnically Albanian. The most famous humanitarian of the 20th century, and she came from the exact same genetic stock as those Bronze Age skeletons. It's a crazy world. Skanderbeg, the guy who held off the Ottomans for 25 years. He wasn't just a general, he was a symbol of European resistance. And his lineage, the Castrioti, they were the princes of this specific genetic pool. And then you have Enver Hoxha, the communist dictator who isolated Albania from the world for 40 years. He was so paranoid he built bunkers everywhere. That paranoia, that insularity, it ironically mirrored the ancient strategy of the Illyrians. The outside world is dangerous. Stay in the mountains. Don't let them in. It's like the genetic memory of the population dictated their geopolitical strategy. Hoxha took the Illyrian playbook and ran it on a national scale. Now, let's address the giant, unavoidable controversy. Alexander the Great. Modern Albanians often claim ancestry via the Paeonians or Illyrians. The Greeks claim him as a Hellenic hero. The North Macedonians claim him as a regional symbol. The truth, based on the source notes, is that Alexander was Macedonian. The genetics of ancient Macedonia are not fully mapped in these studies, so I'm not going to pretend the DNA settles that argument. It doesn't. What we can say is that the region was heavily intertwined. The Illyrians were neighbors to the Macedonians. They traded, they fought, they married. Were the Illyrians Greek? No, they were their own thing. Were they Macedonian? No, but they were part of the same interconnected ancient world. So, when Albanians claim a link to the era of Alexander, it's not totally insane. They were alive during that time. They were players on that board. They just weren't the cavalry charging at Gaugamela. So, why does this matter today? Because the Kosovo dispute. Because the identity politics. Because the diaspora. There are roughly 3 million Albanians in Albania, about 2 million in Kosovo, and a massive diaspora in Italy, Greece, Germany, and the US. The Albanian diaspora is huge. And it's engaged. If you're an Albanian American scrolling YouTube, you've been hearing your whole life that your heritage is a mystery, or that you're a Turk or a newcomer. This DNA research changes that conversation. It says, no, you are the indigenous European population. You are the ones who stayed. But, and this is the provocation part of the framework, if you are an Albanian watching this, you need to hear the caveat. The DNA also proves you are related to your neighbors. It proves you survived, but you didn't survive alone. You are not a pure race. That concept is garbage. You are a resilient mixture with a shockingly strong continuity. Arguing about purity is a fool's game. The power in this data isn't, we are purer than you. The power is, we survived and our genes are the reference point for the entire region. If you are Serbian or Greek watching this, you need to hear this too. The science doesn't support the recent migrant theory. It just doesn't. You can point to linguistic shifts. You can point to medieval political boundaries. But the genetics show that the people living in the mountains of Albania today are the closest living relatives to the Bronze Age inhabitants of Illyria. That's just what the bones say. And if you're Turkish, or you're interested in the Ottoman angle, this is a massive lesson in how empires work. You change the religion, you changed the calendar, but you didn't change the blood. That's actually a testament to the resilience of the local population and maybe a slight embarrassment to the myth of imperial domination. Think about the 2021 Freilich study again. They looked at the social organization of these Bronze Age people. They found continuity. They found that the people who were there stayed there. The 2019 Antonio study showed Rome as a crossing point, but also that the distinct Balkan population was recognizable. The 2022 Lazaridis study drew the map. It showed that the southern arc was a web. But here is the thing about ancient DNA that most YouTube videos don't tell you. It's a growing field. It's not complete. We haven't sequenced a famous Illyrian king. We haven't dug up Queen Teuta. We have fragments from sites like Zvonimirovo and Krivace. These are burial sites. The data we have is strong, but the field is young. Illyrian as a genetic category is a modern reconstruction. We are grouping these Bronze Age people together based on archaeology and geography, and then we are measuring modern DNA against them. So, when I say the Albanians were right, I'm saying it with a high level of confidence based on the current data. But I also have to tell you that the picture will get more detailed. More samples will come. There might be surprises. Maybe we find a massive migration in the Iron Age that we didn't see. Maybe we find that the Illyrians were more diverse than we thought. But the core finding? The one that changes everything? It doesn't look like it's changing. It looks like it's solidifying. The modern Albanian genome is the echo of the Bronze Age. It is the sound of the old Balkans. It is the ghost of a language that refused to die, backed up by a genome that refused to be diluted. Let's talk politics one more time, because I know you're thinking about it. If this DNA is true, does it justify modern land claims? Does it justify Greater Albania? No. And I know people want to use science to win arguments, but genetics doesn't grant land titles. If it did, we'd all have to move back to Africa, which is the actual origin of everyone, and then we'd have a really awkward United Nations meeting. What the DNA does is deconstruct the mythologies. For the Serbs, it means the story that Albanians came from elsewhere is historically false. For the Greeks, it means the story that Epirus was always purely Greek is an oversimplification. For the Albanians, it means the story that we are autochthonous is fundamentally validated, but also complicated by the reality of Slavic and Mediterranean mixing. And for everyone else, it's just fascinating. Here is a scenario for you. You're sitting in a bar in Berlin. You meet a German. You meet an Albanian. You meet a Serbian. They start arguing about who is native. The Albanian points to the mountains. The Serb points to the churches. The German points to the beer. And you can just pull out your phone and say, actually guys, the Bronze Age DNA from Croatia shows continuity across the board. You're literally cousins fighting over who has the bigger bedroom in the same ancestral house. That's where we are. The 2018 Olalde study on the beaker phenomenon also gave us the baseline for how these steppe migrations worked. The Balkans saw the wave around 3500 BCE. That changed the genetic landscape, but then it stabilized. That stabilization is the Illyrian identity, and it's that stabilized identity that we see in modern Albanians. The fact that a language isolate survived in Europe, surrounded by Slavic, Romance, and Greek speakers, is a statistical miracle. Most other isolates, Etruscan, Basque, well, Basque survived, but you get my point, either died or got assimilated. Albanian absorbed influences. It has Latin words, it has Slavic words, it has Turkish words. But the skeleton of the language? It's Paleo-Balkan. The skeleton of the people? Also Paleo-Balkan. We have spent the last 10 years watching DNA disrupt true crime cases, health trends, and genealogical reveals. I thought I was Italian, but I'm actually Welsh. But this is history-level disruption. This is, I thought the Balkans were a chaotic melting pot of recent migrations, but actually, it's a very stable population that endured massive cultural shifts without massive population replacement. That changes the historical narrative. The Romans didn't replace the Illyrians. They recruited them. The Slavs didn't replace the Albanians. They surrounded them. The Ottomans didn't replace them. They governed them. And through it all, the EV13 lineage persisted. The J2B persisted. The BY611 persisted. This is the part where the history books have to be rewritten, not next century. Now, the textbooks in schools in Belgrade, Tirana, and Athens are currently teaching outdated anthropology. They are teaching that nations are fixed biological units that march through time. The DNA says, nations are social constructs. Populations are biological realities. The biological reality is continuity. If you take nothing else away from this video, take this. The next time you hear a Balkan politician stand up and talk about cleansing a territory of foreign elements, understand that the foreign elements carry the genes of the people who were metalsmithing in that exact valley 3,000 years ago. The foreign elements speak a language that echoes the disappeared voices of the Roman Empire's greatest emperors. The situation is either deeply ironic or deeply tragic. Usually, it's both. So yeah, the Albanians were right. And the Serbs were wrong about the migration story. And the Greeks were wrong about the total Hellenization of the South. And the Ottomans were irrelevant genetically. It's rare that you get a scientific result that simultaneously validates a national origin myth while also insulting the imperial history of the Romans, Byzantines, and Ottomans. But here we are. This is uncomfortable for a lot of people. It's uncomfortable because it challenges the narratives that people have fought wars over. It's uncomfortable because it proves that the other you hate is biologically your brother. But man, is it cool. Imagine being an Albanian parent telling your kid this. Hey kid, you know how everyone says we showed up late? Yeah, Dr. Freilich and Dr. Lazaridis looked at the bones. We were there first. We were Diocletian. We were the guys in the mountains. The empire couldn't crack us. That's a good feeling. That's a powerful feeling, and it's backed by data. But with great power comes great responsibility. The responsibility to not use this data to be a jerk. The responsibility to acknowledge the caveats. Modern Albanians are a mixture. They aren't pure Illyrians. Nobody is. The point isn't purity. The point is continuity. The signal survived. The noise changed. And that signal is stronger in the Albanian genome than anywhere else in the former Illyrian territory. The Croats and Serbs have the substrate too, but they have a massive layer of Slavic superstrate on top. The Albanians? They kept the substrate at the surface. This is why the title of this video says, "It changes everything about the Balkans." Because if we accept that the Albanians are the direct genetic descendants of the indigenous Bronze Age population, the entire narrative of who is a settler flips. It legitimizes the deep history of the Albanian claim. It also forces the neighbors to realize that their own history contains a massive Illyrian component that they have been ignoring in favor of their Slavic or Hellenic identities. We are all looking at the same data, but we are reading different books. Genetics is the translator. The battle over history is often a battle over victimhood. We were here first. They took it from us. That's the drug of nationalism. DNA removes the ambiguity. It shows exactly when the big shifts happened. It shows the timeline. And the timeline says, Albanians have been in the Balkans for a very, very long time. Their language is old. Their genes are old. Their survival is unprecedented. I've been doing this channel for a while, and I've covered a lot of DNA mysteries. Some are straightforward, some are surprising, but this one feels different. This one feels like the final chapter of an argument that started with a Roman historian or a Byzantine chronicler. Where did these people come from? Now we know. They didn't come from anywhere. They were always there. It's a simple answer to a complicated question. And usually, in history, the simple answers are the right ones. But they are also the ones that people spend centuries denying because they don't fit the political map. The political map says Albania is a small country bordered by bigger powers. The genetic map says Albania is the last solid landmass of the ancient Balkan tectonic plate. The rest of the region drifted. Albania stayed anchored. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, okay, cool, but why should I, a random person on the internet, care about EV13 or R1BBY611? You should care because it changes how you understand identity. Identity isn't just a flag, it isn't just a language. It's a living process. And by looking at these genes, we can see the process of survival. We can see a group of people who refuse to be erased. The Romans tried to civilize them. They became Romans. The Byzantines tried to absorb them. They held the mountain passes. The Ottomans tried to convert them. They converted, but they kept their blood. The communists tried to isolate them. They dreamed of Skanderbeg in the bunkers. The more things change, the more the DNA stays the same. And the language. Always the language. When I think about the Albanian language being an isolate, I think about it like a missing link. It's like finding a living dinosaur. It's a window into a time before Greek and Slavic dominated the corridors of power. It's the voice of the shepherds who were there when the Roman legions marched through. It's the voice of the soldiers who served Diocletian. It's the voice of the rebels who followed Skanderbeg. And now, in the 21st century, An Albanian kid in New York or Milan can get a DNA test, see EV13 pop up, and know that this isn't just a random mutation. This is the marker of Illyria. This is the marker of the Bronze Age. This is the proof. The specific DNA from those Illyrian burial sites, Zvonimirovo, Krivace, they show continuity. That word, continuity, it's the most powerful word in this entire script. It's not superiority, it's not purity, it's continuity. Unbroken, enduring. Every empire that claimed to have erased the Albanians failed, and now, with the tools of modern science, we can see the physical evidence of that failure. We can see the resilience written in the double helix. So, the next time you look at a map of Europe, look at that little strip of land on the Adriatic. Look at the mountains. Understand that you are looking at a genetic time capsule, a place where the past isn't just in museums. It's in the bloodstream. And that's the whole picture. History was lying. DNA doesn't lie. Subscribe if you want more of this. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one. Thanks for staying until the very end. Goodbye for now.